Hi there, my name is Neil Blevins, and this tutorial is called Composition Types. So when you're trying to find good compositions using all the various techniques, stuff like compositional weight, focal points, contrast, etc., you tend to come across the same general sort of compositions again and again. And while we all want to make innovative stuff, there's nothing wrong with the foundation of our compositions being based on tried and true formulas. After all, the reason they work is because the eye and the brain process visuals in a very specific way, and these sorts of rules have been proven to work well for the human brain for thousands of years. So let's go through a bunch of the more common composition types, and hopefully this will help explain some of your own compositions, why they work and why they don't, and inspire you to try using them as the basis for new work. So before starting, I just wanted to give some love to two sources of information on this subject that were helpful when I was in my early days of art. First off, Andrew Loomis's book Creative Illustration was a real influential book in my early days, and has a number of pages dedicated to the subject. And then a little more modern, I always loved this CG Talk article by Phil Straub about composition. And years later, I had the chance to work for Phil on a video game project, and let me tell you, this guy definitely walks the walk when it comes to the theory that he teaches. Links to both of these resources are in the info section of the video. So here are the 18 different types of compositions that we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to go through each one, discuss a little bit about it, and show some examples. So the first one is the circle, and this causes the eye to follow the curve, which keeps it from exiting the picture frame. And circles can be actual circles or implied circles. So this one here, you can see we have an actual circle, actually more of an oval because we're in perspective. And what happens is the eye will go in and it'll get caught in this and it'll kind of twist around like this, which causes it to stay in the composition rather than leaving the composition by going out here or here. And then this has also got another circle over here, so a bunch of circles that are all together which kind of solidify the eye in this area of the image. And then this one here is what's meant by implied circle. So there isn't an actual circle here, but there's all of these twisty shapes which are all spinning around this central point here. And so that causes the eye once again to sort of follow these curves and get stuck in the middle of the canvas and not leave the canvas. And on top of that, you also have right at the center the focal point, which is this sun here, which is an area of high contrast. And so all of these help pull the eye towards the area of high contrast in the center. Next we have the rectangle. So just like the canvas itself, a second rectangle shape is placed inside of the painting, trapping the viewer's eye inside. It feels more formal than the circle because it has hard edges. And rectangles, once again, can be actual rectangles or implied rectangles. And in this case, this is an actual rectangle because we're in a hallway here and we're looking out of this door into an area that's much brighter than the stuff that's going on in the hallway. And so once again, the eye is kind of directed here and then stuck here because it can't leave the confines of this rectangle here. So next we have the pyramid. And the pyramid has a wide base and then a really thin top. And so it frequently is used to show stability and balance, just like the pyramids of Egypt that stood up for thousands of years. And once again, pyramids can be actual pyramids or implied pyramids. So for example, here's an implied one because we have the character here and they're framed by this pyramidal shape that goes on there, which is actually sort of the lack of a pyramid because it's the negative space around this big structure here. And so this kind of focuses the eye in this area, and then right in the center of this is the main focal point, which again is also really contrasted, being dark against the light background. And then here's another example, and this one is an actual pyramid. So this giant pyramid here, it's a more sci-fi pyramid. You can see with the spaceships and everything like that, and also the big neon green shape. But because we know generally what the pyramids of Egypt looked like, this immediately gives us a sense of the scale of this thing, and it feels really huge because it relates to something that we already know. And once again, you got the really thick base at the bottom, which gives it that sense of stability and strength. So another type of composition is iconic, and in older paintings, a common technique was to place your subject near the center of the painting, and the subject would be entirely in the frame without going out of the frame. And this plus a predisposition for symmetry defines the iconic painting. And this is used commonly for formal or religious subjects, so someone you're supposed to look up to or idolize. So in this case, this painting I used the iconic style, and you'll note that the character stays almost entirely inside of this diamond shape. And right down the center is the center line of both the character and the grid. And then there's a lot of symmetry here. So even though there's perspective, you can see that this is copied over here, this is copied over here, and this area here is copied over there. And the idea is that this is supposed to be some sort of Grim Reaper sort of character. And so to give that feel, I tried using the iconic style because I felt it would sort of give that impression of this is some sort of biblical angel that has come down to judge you. So the cross is two lines, one vertical, one horizontal, with a point in the center. It leads the eye along the horizontal line and then along the vertical line, and where the two cross creates a focal point. Also in the Western world, the cross has a religious meaning which can enhance or detract from your painting's meaning. And like iconic, it can also feel a little formal. So similar to the last one, this is another one of these sort of scary characters in the mist. And in this case, you have the cross going here and here, and where the 2 points meet, or at least very close to where the 2 points meet, is the focal point, which is the eye of the robot. So next comes the slide. And the diagonal element in the painting causes the eye to travel along it, which gives the image a sense of speed, like gravity pulling you down a slide. The implied movement also makes the image more dynamic and a touch uneasy. In film, tilting the camera to create this sort of slide is called a Dutch angle, and is used to give the audience an uneasy feeling. And so you can see here, rather than this being straight up and down, I just tilted it ever so slightly, and the eye kind of travels down it. And then here's another example here. This is of a space elevator, and same sort of deal. This one's even more extreme. So we start up here and we travel down, sliding down the diagonal here, which brings us through the entire painting. So similar to the slide, we also have the Z arrangement. And this has the dynamic feeling of the slide, but then adds a bar at the top and bottom, which helps keep the subject anchored. So the idea is you read up here the title, and then you go down the slide, which is where the spaceship is zooming along, which gives it that sense of speed, and then gets caught again on this bottom of the Z here. So very similar to the slide, except you got these two elements at the top and bottom. In this case, I used text to create this, as opposed to other things in the painting itself. But it gives it the sense of speed, but at the same time kind of frames it in to keep it more solid. So next is the L arrangement. So it makes an L shape, and it's similar to the rectangle, except the rectangle is touching the side of the painting. This can feel a little unbalanced if you're not careful, since a lot of the detail is weighed to one side. So you can see the L, and you have this big area going down here, and then a big area going over there, and then this area is kind of blank. And in this case, what I did to make it a little bit more balanced is instead of, like, say, cutting off the L here with straight lines, I curved, going like this. And I think that gave a bit of a better balance there than if it were vacant here. If it was vacant and this area here was all light, I might have put another element, like maybe a darker element over here, to try to balance off those two things. So next is the H arrangement. And it's a very stable arrangement since you have two straight vertical lines that are balanced on each side of the painting. And always kind of reminds me a bit of a horse with a rider sitting on top of it. So this one, you have these two elements here, and then balanced across there. And you could even argue that there's sort of an implied H going on inside here, there, and there, with it going across as well. So it creates a really strong sense of stability. Next we have our Y arrangement, and so the top of the Y gives a sense of movement due to the diagonal nature of the lines, but then the V on top is stabilized with a pillar, which goes down to the bottom. So you can see here there's actually multiple Ys, but here, and then they all funnel into this long, the bottom stem of the Y, which gives it a little bit more stability than if it was just the upside down triangles up here. So next is the C arrangement, which is similar to the L, but we add a roof. So it can give an uneasy feeling because we have something looming at the top of the image when we should be seeing bright blue sky, sort of like a large bird ready to swoop down and attack. So you can see that here. This area down here is the bottom, and then it goes up, although in this case it's a slight angle, but same idea. And then we have this big thing looming over top and a little bit of darkness up here, which really focuses the eye in this area right here. So then we have the V arrangement. And this gives also an uneasy feeling because it's an upside down pyramid. So if the pyramid is stable, this is unstable, trying to stay upright on a tiny point with a big weight above it. It can also feel a little dangerous, like someone is stabbing downwards with a sharp knife. So you can see not only do we have a bunch of smaller V's going here on the ceiling of the cave, but then we have one giant one which is stabbing down right here. And then using the same image as an example, this is the X arrangement. So it's halfway between a slide and a cross. It's a very dynamic composition, which implies movement, but also where the two lines cross creates an excellent focal point. And the two diagonals trap the eye in the painting, sort of like X marks the spot. So as well as that V, there's also another one which is coming up from the floor and meeting right here. So you have this X going on, and right at the center of the X, that creates a natural focal point, and then on top of that I enhanced it by creating an area that's dark with a lot of light around it. So it's sort of a double focal point because of the contrast, and then also because of the way the composition forms. And then here's another X arrangement, and so the background, actually if I remember right, I started off by making the characters Dutch like this, where they are going up at this angle, and then I wanted something in the background, and rather than having the stuff in the background be at the same angle, like sort of like going like this way, I decided instead to contrast it by putting something at the cross angle, which is going up this way. And I think that created a more dynamic composition than if I had made whatever the giant rock formations in the back going, in the same angle that the main characters were going. And then one more X, and this one is a guy standing in front of this huge robot, and so you have one part of it here, and then another part of it here, and if you wanted to, you could even claim that the arms form a second X, whereas you got the arms going here and here, and then the second set of arms going from here to here. So we're done with letters, and now is just a few more to go, and one of them is the compound curve. So this is frequently used as a way to lead a viewer's eye into a painting. And then the most common example of this is the river in a landscape that swerves left and right and gets smaller as it goes off into the distance. And it kind of brings the viewer's eye along with it as it goes off to the focal point. So here's an example of one of my paintings where I do something similar. And in this case, instead of a river, I have a staircase. And the staircase goes left and right and left and right and travels up here. And that helps bring the eye into the painting and pass by all the key elements that you want to look at. So next is the radial composition. So the radii is where lines converge into a single dot. This can create a sense of movement. Placing your focal point near where the lines cross will bring the eye right to where it's supposed to look. Also resembles a one-point perspective grid or an explosion. So you can see here, this is a warp gate that these ships are coming out of, and to really enhance the radii, I actually created trails from all the different spaceships, so jet engine trails, and they all kind of explode from this one point in the center. And then here's another example. This one's interior, and in this one you have all of the perspective lines of the parts of the corridor, and they're all pointing to the center, which is where the text is. And the same with light. So you'll notice that the area around here is darker, and then it gets lighter as it gets closer and closer to the center. So I'm using light and then also the radial perspective lines in order to bring you to where you're supposed to look. So then we have symmetrical compositions. So like iconic, a lot of older religious paintings use symmetry heavily, and many old churches use symmetry in their architecture. So making your painting heavily symmetrical gives that sense of power and ancient majesty. Another good way to create symmetry is to use water reflections. So in this painting, I wanted this to be sort of this big ancient civilization, this giant head of government kind of building. And so I use symmetry a lot to give it that feel. And you can see everywhere where there's something on one side, it has a corresponding one on the other side. So these areas here, the flags hanging down here, the lines going up here and here. And speaking about water reflections, I don't have an example here, but basically if you have landscape up top and then you have the bottom half of the painting is reflections in the water, you're going to get an exact reflection of what's at the top at the bottom, which also creates symmetry, which can give some of that same feel. So next we have the rule of thirds. So you split the canvas into thirds, both horizontally and vertically, and then you place elements along these lines and object focal points where the lines intersect. And if you read books left to right, then placing objects on the right intersections helps the eye travel towards something when it enters the image on the left. And many paintings place one focal point at a top intersection and then a second focal point at the bottom intersection on the other side of the image. But make sure if you do this that one of the focal points is dominant, or else they're going to fight for the eye's attention. So in this example, this shows that if you break this up into thirds, the bottom line right here is at 1/3, and that's right where the cloud cover is. And then this guy here is at one of the third lines, and then this guy here is at another one of the third lines. And you might notice that this element over here, which is a pretty prominent focal point, is not at one of these intersections. And I could have put it at one of the intersections, but the problem was that in order to balance off the piece, because you had a dark area here, if you placed this dark area over here, then this area would be too empty. So this is a case where I used the rule of thirds, but at the same time I cheated a little bit and pushed this over this way in order to make sure that the composition felt balanced because of the darkness and brightness. So again, these are all just examples of things to try. It's not a hard, fast rule that it has to be a certain way. So the final one we're going to discuss is the ever-popular golden ratio. So this is a container for a lot of similar ideas. For example, the golden rectangle, the golden spiral, the golden rule, the divine proportions, etc. So in short, the golden ratio is a concept created by the ancient Greeks based on observing nature. So two quantities are in the golden ratio if their ratio is the same as the ratio of their sum to the larger of the two quantities. So calculating this results in the number 1 to 1.618, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. But using this ratio, we can create any number of different grids, including rectangles, circles, and the spiral, which appears a lot in nature, such as seashells. It's thought that this is a sort of divine ratio, that if you use it in your art, you're tapping into some sort of godly number that will please the eye. So here's two examples in two very famous paintings. And so you can see as you follow this spiral here, it starts off down here with this element, and then moves its way up, and then goes into more and more detail as you get closer to the center. And the same thing here. The center of this spiral leads to the eye, which then this curve follows through the entire piece and going down to the bottom. And I don't tend to use the golden ratio for my own work, but just for the heck of it, I tried placing it in a couple of my images, and some of them do actually follow this rule. For example, this guy here, I know this followed the rule of thirds, which I showed before, but it also does have some element to it that follows this golden spiral. So if you follow here, it goes up and around, and it touches the edge of this pillar, and then goes around again and around, and this proportion here touches the edge of this pillar. And when you finally end up at the end of the spiral, you're at the focal point, which is this sun right here. And again, just to explain a little more about these proportions, if you look at the distance from here to here and the distance from here to here, this is a value of 1, and this is a value of 1.6. 1.618, that is. And then if you look at this proportion here, this is 1, and then this is in the proportion of 1.6. And same here. So if you look at these, this subdivision here, so this area here is 1, and this is 1.6. And so that's what I meant back here when I was talking about calculating the result of this number, is that ratio is kept in all these different spots as we spiral into the center right here. And then also just to end showing you a few combos. And the reality is that most images are not a single kind of composition. They're usually combinations of a couple different types. So for example, this one here is a starship coming out of this enormous space portal. And this starship is supposed to be old and ancient, and it's supposed to give you a sense of awe. So we have the triangle here that it's coming out of. It's coming out of this big pyramidal shape. And also you'll note that we start here, like if you made a perspective grid, you start at this spot, and then you go up with the perspective lines, and that creates a radial composition. And one of the best examples of a radial composition, if you've seen the very first Star Wars film, in the first sequence you have the Star Destroyer that is going overhead, and as it's going overhead, all those perspective lines are pointing in a radial composition to the focal point, and the focal point is the tiny ship that it's chasing. And so this hopefully gives a little bit of that same feeling of this enormous ship that's going overhead of the viewer using these two different kinds of composition. And then one other one, which also has the pyramid in it, and then also has the rule of thirds. And so you can see the pyramid is the shape of the city, and then the rule of thirds, you have the horizon line, which is a little bit below the third, but then some of these mountains brings it up to a third. And then you have the city itself is sitting on one of the vertical thirds, and then the person is right beside the second vertical third. And again, it's not exactly on this line, and it doesn't have to be, but the main reason it's not is the same reason for that other one I mentioned, and that is to balance off this large object. If I'm going to have a small object, that small object, number one, I made it darker so that it has a little bit more weight to it, and then I pushed it a little bit closer to the right, again, to try to balance off this. And in fact, some of these mountain things in the background are also up there to try to weigh the image in a certain direction. So that's another one of the reasons why you might not put something directly on the intersection line, but just close to it to make sure that you have a balanced image. So thanks for watching, and hopefully this gives you a starting spot for some of your own paintings. And remember, it's not important to always follow one of these composition types, but something I like to do is start off by winging it, and then if something feels off about my painting, I put on one of these sorts of formal grids, like for example the rule of thirds, and then play around with the elements in the painting in Photoshop to more carefully match the grid. So just consider it another tool to help you fix visual problems and to make sure your choice of composition is giving the feeling you want to the audience. So thanks again for watching, and if you want to see more tutorials like this, please go to neilblevins.com and go to the art lesson section where I have a bunch of tutorials in both video and text form. And if you want to be notified the next time I post a new video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much.